Thank you for staying with us. As at October 13, 1980, $1,000, 1,000 US dollars sold for 546 naira 45 kobo. Today, $1,000 is more than 500,000 naira. And then this policy, which has also, of course, jacked up the price of the dollar to the naira. How is this affecting anyone? Well, I'm definitely not an expert. We have two gentlemen joining us this morning who have also been a part of this conversation for years. Gabriel Idahosa is managing partner, UHY Margie. He's a business advisory firm, and he is also vice president, LCCI, and chairman, Trade Promotion Board of the LCCI. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
We also have with us Professor Pat Utomi, who is Professor of Political Economy and Management expert. He joins us virtually. Thank you for joining us this morning, Prof.
Great pleasure.
Yes, sir. Let me begin with you, Mr. Idahosa. For the businessman, this is a lot more arduous than it's ever been. And there are those who feel it's a start, it's going to get better. But then there's also the fear that the law of gravity doesn't usually work in this respect all the time. What's your take? Initial reaction, and what are your hopes?
On the policy?
Yes.
Certainly, it was something that needed to happen.
Okay.
It was not even supposed to happen. There are hardly any other country that routinely gives foreign currency to bureau de changes anywhere in the world. Because bureau de changes are not part of the essential financial system. They provide retail services at the end user point. For example, a tourist coming into Nigeria at the airport or the seaport. That is what bureau de changes are meant for. They are not supposed to be channels for regular supply for foreign currency in any country. So that was the problem that was created by us. Like many other economic policies that have inflicted the economy, where the economy itself could run very smoothly if those policies were not there. And you find economic watchers keep saying that a significant part of Nigerian economic problems are simply policy inflicted. We take policies that run against the grain of sense of economic sense. So you don't distribute dollars every week to someone who is neither an importer nor an exporter nor a regular financial services provider like a bank.
So what initiated it in the first place?
Well, you have to go into history, and some people felt that at some point, the so-called retail users of foreign currency, people want to travel, they need basic travel allowance, were not having access to such facilities in the banks, and that you needed to open up more access. But that was a convenient argument to enable vested interests to begin to get this foreign currency on a regular basis. And of the thousands of bureau de changes you have in Nigeria, you can only find between 10 and 15 in any airport. All the other bureau de changes are offices in private homes and private offices that do not provide currency to anybody in the public, other than collecting it every week and use it for speculation and making rent income.
Well, Prof, I mean, you have been talking about stuff like this for a very, very long time. Is it a shock to you that it even happened in the first place?
No, if it didn't happen, I would have been surprised. Look, we create problems for ourselves, and then we begin to drown in trying to deal with the problems that we have created. But let me say that for me, it's a broader conversation than the fact that we have created these problems. It's a failure to trust markets and play into this game that overemphasizes the demand side rather than the supply side. I don't think that we have done enough to make the economy generate foreign exchange. And because we have not done enough, once that one major source, oil, gets challenged, we begin to panic and to do things which have an announcement effect that further worsens the situation. The announcement effect sometimes is much more problematic than what you're trying to deal with. So we need to return to fundamentals. That's really where the problem is. Returning to the fundamentals of markets. How do we ensure that more people are producing and exporting and earning? If they are exporting, earning, the transactions of around what they bring in can go to a very disaggregated market. Let's not forget that we are in the age of technology. We're in the fourth industrial revolution, and we're going to have fintech dominate what we call banking today. And those, when we really get to the heart of those, central bank will not be able to be threatening up and down. It will be a losing game. So what we need to do is deal with the fundamentals more, and not the kind of issues that Mr. Idahosa was just explaining that leads to these self-inflicted, conflicted challenges that unfortunately are looking us in the face.
Well, Prof, there are those who say that we have been here before. We have tried to do what we have been here before, and now one way or the other we backtracked. And then it comes back, and then things, we just seem to. So the question on my mind right now is, just what do we need to do to sustain this production challenge that you just raised? Because a lot of things that we do today, many things are imported, both consumables and infrastructure facilities, they are imported. And naturally, as you would expect, there's been a hike in the price of the dollar to the naira today. So if this is a good idea and it's already adversely affecting us this way, what are the hopes, especially for the businessman?
Well, again, I hate to sound like a broken record. I can think of myself saying these things 30 years ago. When we got into a structural logjam about 1980, 81, 82, it was that oil prices collapsed on us. The incentives were not enough to generate any foreign exchange. But I recall that as we began to move towards markets, we started with second-tier foreign exchange market and liberalized further. People began to rush, and of course, we made mistakes in the process, to try and export rubber, export that. As a particular case study that I like to refer to, a gentleman who went into the agrochemicals, pesticides, herbicides business, and foreign exchange was not available. But the incentive regime was improving enough for him to begin to export rubber, and the proceeds from the rubber being exported were then used to bring in the pesticides, generics that he needed to then repackage and distribute in Nigeria, and the business took off like a rocket. Now, what I see happening is that once there's plenty of naira being generated from crude oil sales, the whole business of rent kicks in. Those who have power find ways to extract rent from the system, and we manipulate and forget the markets that helped us come back to a certain even keel. And we come to this position again. So like I said, we're going in a vicious circle. Let me, give this example, as people also fear too much exchange rates dropping. The Japanese, I remember back in the 70s, 80s, anytime that their exchange rate got stronger, they got worried. They didn't want a strong exchange rate. Back in those days, the yen used to exchange for 300 to the dollar. Of course, as they produced and exported more and more, naturally, it will become stronger. As it got stronger, the Japanese were worried. They didn't want a strong exchange rate because they were producing and exporting, and that gave them leverage in the market. It took pressure on the part of those importing from them, the Americans, to get the yen to get stronger and stronger and stronger, which the Japanese didn't want. We must go to a situation where our passion is for encouraging production. I know that central bank tries to do a number of things to encourage production, but central bank is way out of its depths in the way it tries to do those things. In fact, the rent agents get in the way and extract that as rent themselves, so that the incentives aren't really playing through to those who can really produce. The political actors and co ganache those incentives, as it were, to produce. Let us trust markets more and make the kinds of incentives that will encourage people to produce, to export, and not, and leave them. They can then send to the bureau de change or whoever it is that they want to sell to, but the market then develops and the price will, come to an equilibrium that helps for the economy to regenerate itself. Unfortunately, we have not been doing that in a proper way. We're still looking so much to attract revenues rather than produce. That is the problem of this economy.
Just one question comes to my mind right now. Hitherto, what has kept us from doing the things we need to do, initiating the policies that should have helped us to be more of a producing economy than an importing economy?
Very simple. Very simple. Bad politics. You see, the politics of our country is based on how you can use power in a state capture scenario to provide material benefit to some people who have done no work. That is the entire structure of our political order. Once that order remains the dominant factor, the people who should not be in public life get in there, and they will pressure the system to make the wrong choices so that they and their friends can get material benefits that then become disincentive for how the system should make for a better life for everybody. So politics is at the heart of our problems. Whether the institutions are called central bank or whatever it is they're called, they respond not to markets. Look, I once said that it frightened the class I was speaking to, that if I wanted to fix Nigeria's problem, I will appoint Raghuram Rajan, who just ran the Reserve Bank of India, as Nigeria Central Bank governor. He will feel the pressures, and this economy will run differently. The governor is my friend, the incumbent governor. I am so supportive for him to succeed remarkably, but I know the pressures that he's under. And few people can manage those pressures without doing damage to the economy. So the problem is the politics, and we need to deal with that. If we don't deal with that, we'll be in this vicious cycle, just going around and around and around and around. Unfortunately, and we'll just keep getting poorer as a country.
Politics, policies, economy. It seems the businessman is right at the middle of it and stuck with whatever the whims or the winds blow at any given point.
Yes, definitely.
But you cited an example of other countries that haven't been doing the kind of things that we've been doing through bureau de changes. But this thing happens in various other countries as well. What is it that helps others? What lessons could we learn from where that would help us to get out of this as quickly as possible? Because if we don't produce, we can't generate employment or jobs that will create employment for people, and we cannot, make the naira better.
Look, the essential lesson is that you can't fight the market. From the former communist and socialist countries to Venezuela, to Eastern Europe, even to African countries, politicians can do what they like. They can take any decisions they like, but you can't fight the market. The market will establish itself and decide your fate. That is where Venezuela is where it is today. So politicians can take any decisions. They can decide to manipulate the system. They can decide to ignore the market and try to dictate to the people what policies they want. But the market will assert itself. The market will reward you, as it has shown in the case of countries that understand and follow the market, as Professor Utomi has described Japan, and will punish those who don't want to respect and understand that the market is like the natural flow of water. Water must flow in a certain direction. So if you create a policy that blocks the flow of water, up to a certain point, you build a dam. At some point, the water will destroy the dam and everything you try to put there. So the lesson is simple. Governments have to understand that the economy has its own rules. Any economy must conform to the market, or you build a structure that you struggle to maintain. And sooner or later, the market will override it. So the countries that have succeeded are those that have understood that. So you see China, when they understood the market and they understood that the socialist economic system was not going to grow the country, they decided they will still have the Chinese Communist Party, which is still there till tomorrow, but allow a free market. So China is a good example of sensible politics, where they say we will still keep a political system that we think makes sense, but we allow an economy that follows the market principles. And it has worked.
Okay, well, so many questions I want to ask you, but let me take this to Markwe. She has questions for you, gentlemen. Markwe?
Well, it would seem that there is some fear about liberalizing, excuse me, certain sectors of our economy. Allowing the naira to free float is one. Allowing us to determine, or the markets to determine what the price of petrol, for instance, PMS should be in the Nigerian economy has been a very difficult one, and that's also consuming a lot of our forex as well as our revenue. The third one is electricity, which we also understand is heavily subsidized. Now, all of this is supposed to be protecting the Nigerian people and also ensuring that the most vulnerable are able to get access to these things at a fairly reasonable price. Now, if that is the situation, first, I want to know, can we really do without subsidies? Especially one, we're considering the naira in this instance. The CBN has been defending the naira. They're afraid to let it float because they think that it will cause an inflation which they might not be able to control and which will also have adverse effects on the Nigerian people. What are your thoughts in that regard, and how we've also, dealt with subsidies as a people?
Going?
Yes.
Okay. Well, you see, naked truth is that we have so much by way of example to show the limitations of that general explanation. Yes, it is true that if we want to grow this economy, we may need to have certain limited industrial policy to guide a path of growth. But using protection of consumers as excuse to create an opportunity for people to extract rent falls in the face of experience. Let me give you a short example. I hope I can manage it in a few seconds. In 1996, I went on sabbatical. I spent a year writing a book at the Harvard Business School, and I arrived in Boston, Cambridge, where I rented a small house. I wanted a telephone. I've told this story many times. I went to the phone booth in front of the house that I had just leased to make a call to say, where is the telephone station where I can come and rent a phone or get a phone line? And they said, you probably don't need to. I said, well, I just moved to the States. And they said, have you ever had a phone number in the US? I said, yes. So if you've ever had a phone number in the US, just call this number, give them your old number, and if your credit is good, the phone in the house will ring by 6 p.m. I thought, wow. 6 p.m., I pick it up. I have to choose my own long-distance provider. At the time, it was Sprint. And I got some rates. I found that if a poor being protected in Nigeria were to call me, they would be paying much more than I calling Nigeria. So my family got the instruction, please don't call me, I'll call you. And I was calling morning, afternoon. Oh, have they gone to school? Are they back from school? First month, I got a huge bill. I paid, of course. Next month, I got a big bill. I paid. Then suddenly, I get a call from the telephone company. And they said, we realize you've been making lots of long-distance calls. My first reaction was, Nigeria. They think I'm 419. I said, yes. Is there a problem with that? They said, no. What we have, because we see how many calls you make, we want to reduce your long-distance rate by half. And the first 2 months that you have paid, we'll give them to you as a welcome incentive. So until you consume the amount of that within that half price that we're giving you, you won't need to pay any phone bill. And I was saying to myself, this is madness. Christmas in August. Then it occurred to me, my goodness, you are an idiot, Pat. You just arrived this country to write a book on competition and strategy, and you can't realize that these guys just notice the volume of your calls, and they know somebody else will offer you a better rate. So they quickly offered you a better rate and incentives. So the logic was to protect the Nigerian phone caller, and yet he was much worse off than what the market was allowing from some other angle. However, having said that, if you are going to grow this economy, my personal perspective of a growth strategy is what in today's structural economics you will refer to as latent comparative advantage. You take a factor endowment. Maybe we want to grow on the sesame seed value chain. Then you provide limited support, protection, and all kinds of things around sesame seeds so that we can quickly, in a few years, dominate that value chain, create value. But not saying, oh, protect these consumers. No, you protect the consumers by getting efficient players, not by handing licenses to operate to your friends. And then they are incompetent, and so you have to pay so much more for power than they are paying for power in Rwanda or elsewhere. No, you get the very best in the world, open the market for them, and you will see prices tumble in that area. Like we saw this happen with telecoms in Nigeria. So that excuse of protecting the consumer is used and abused by people who want to extract rent or give advantage to their friends. I don't buy that.
Prof, let me ask you to please hold your thoughts. When we come back, we'll also ask for Mr. Idahosa's intervention on this. Please stay with us. Mr. Idahosa, I'd like you to intervene on this conversation on subsidies and whether or not, we really can do without them, considering how fragile our economy is. Yes.
Well, I think we just come down to practical experience rather than go the path of economic theories and look at what we did with the telecom industry. Before year 2000, a mobile line was costing anything about 100,000, 200,000 to get a mobile line, the old 090. And at some time in this country, we were told that telephones are not for everybody. It's not for the poor men when we complained. And then we had a government that had the courage to open that industry and to say that whether people complain or not, we are going to open the industry. And we granted licenses. At the beginning, a telephone line was 36,000. The first people who got telephones, mobile phones in this country from the operators was 36,000. And it was 50 naira per minute to make a call. But within 2 to 3 years, that came down to where we are now, where a SIM card, which is a telephone line, is free, and we all know what it is with pricing. That simply explains the whole story about creating subsidies in the assumption that you are protecting any set of people, whether it is electricity tariff, whether it is petroleum prices, is the same story. When you create subsidies, the first thing that happens is you prevent other suppliers who can supply that product at a lower price to come into the market. So you create subsidies for petroleum products. Over the last 30 years, the various international oil companies that are ready, have the capacity to build factories, refineries in Nigeria, did not build the refineries because they cannot produce and sell petroleum products at a price that is less than the cost of production. And so we kept subsidizing. We have subsidized for 30, 40 years. The Nigerian, whether it's a worker or the unemployed, has not fared better. So whatever we have subsidized power, it has not worked. So it's not complicated economics. If you subsidize, it means you are cutting off everything that comes with increased supply. All the jobs you create from refineries that would have been built in the last 30 years, all the jobs you create from power companies that would have been in this, that would have produced more power, just like we have several companies producing telephone lines. We have more telephone lines than Nigerians need now. The price is so low that everybody can afford it. The reason why we have that we had a government at some point that had the courage to say we are not going to protect one company, Nitel, because we are trying to protect Nigerians working in Nitel, or because we want some people to have access to telephone at that time. It's very, if you look at it from that perspective, it's not complicated. Anytime you subsidize, you punish the same people you are subsidizing long term until you remove the subsidy, as we saw in Telecom. And the market will take care of these poor people that we think are suffering. They are suffering now because we simply have prevented those who can solve the problem of high petroleum prices to come in and produce a lot more petrol. The people who can solve the problem of poor quality, insufficient power, to invest in power and bring down the prices of power. So it's not economics, it's just a system of political arrangement that plays to the gallery of public opinion. And of course, we are not all economic experts to understand that these decisions are wrong, and they will be wrong in any economy.
I don't know if you can hear me, Mr. Idahosa.
Yes, I can hear you.
Sorry, I have been trying to come in for a few minutes now. I wanted to ask you, because some people will say that some products are more essential than others. You've cited the example of telecoms, and some people will say, well, in the first instance, not everybody had telephones. So the initial, the bravery or the courage that the government had to show or exhibited, was not immediately felt by those who did not have telephones, but eventually were able to buy when the price came down. For something as essential as petrol, those initial shocks, what would you ask that government do to cushion? I mean, assuming they were to liberalize, assuming they were to say we're handing off, importation of petrol and we're opening up the market, those initial shocks that will be felt, how would you suggest that government, because they will be serious shocks, how would you suggest that government is able to cushion, that initial shock? Because I imagine that it might go on for a while before prices are able to come down. I think that's what many governments are usually quite afraid of.
Yes. The initial shocks will be there. And what a lot of people have said is it requires government to first have the courage to say, I want to take those decisions, and set in motion the solution, the so-called palliative solutions. For example, our public transportation system is not what it is. So if you want to remove the subsidy, what comes first? Do you fix the public transportation to a level where most people can have access to good public transportation, and then you remove the subsidy? Or you remove the subsidy and then you try to quickly ramp up public transportation? The straight answer to your question is we need to work on public transportation to a level where almost every Nigerian has an option of one or two alternative public modes of transport. That can happen. It requires a lot of courage to do both. you need to quickly grow the public transportation system, and then you need to gradually remove the subsidies. The subsidy removal has always been treated more of like a political rather than economic situation. If we had over time, over say 2 or 3 years, gradually remove subsidy and at the same time ramp up public transportation, side by side, there will be some amount of suffering for short periods as we see public transportation improving very rapidly. But it requires government to show that transparency, to say we understand there are problems and that this is how we are dealing with it. If we don't do that, we will stay where we are now and say we don't want the people to suffer, and so we will keep the subsidies, and then we don't get out of it, and we are stuck there in the vicious circle. So you require courage to say this is something that needs to be done. How we do it to minimize the suffering is what we want to address. And actually, if we all come together and address the issue of solutions in the short term, they are possible. Other countries have done it. Countries that are not far from us, Egypt, for example, has gone through that. And there were some suffering for short periods, but they succeeded. If we are not ever going to do it, then the market will deal with us. If we try to continue with the subsidies forever, believing that that's the way to go.
Let me ask Prof. Prof, I'm wondering, there are those who also believe, I mean, some of this free flow to the Naira, liberalize the markets. There's always a talk around, oh, these are IMF policies, they're meant to, constrict us, and, those kinds of talks have always, they prevailed for a long time. I mean, I'm sure way before I was born. I'm asking, from your own experience, do you really think that there is some truth in some of these conspiracies, that there could be external factors militating against, say, African states in terms of these influences they try to bring, asking us to open up and liberalize the economy, when we know, for instance, that in many developed countries, there is still some protectionism which still reigns supreme. Take, for instance, the US, where the food markets are still heavily protected. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes. Well, there is a suffice of writings on a grand conspiracy theory and all of that. I don't know whether they're there as pure conspiracy or they're not. But the IMF is not always right. We're not dealing with a perfect science in economics. They've made mistakes. I'll give you an example of the Asian financial crisis. I spent a bit of time in Southeast Asia during the Asian financial crisis of 1997-98. Mahathir Mohamad in Malaysia chose to say to hell with you, IMF, and traveled a track different than Indonesia and some of the others did. And Malaysia was the first to emerge from the financial crisis. And years later, the IMF would admit that Mahathir's thinking was superior to theirs. So we must not just be driven by what they think in Washington. The Washington Consensus, for example, which is what most of the structural adjustment programs run on, had limitations. It damaged fundamentally our education system, for example. So you need to be able to come to the plate, look at your conditions, and look at what's best for yourselves long-term without this political overplaying the political games for some people's benefits. So it is possible that we can go our track with the best interest of the people at heart, knowing that ultimately markets do more for the people than those. I give an example of what Mr. Idahosa was talking about relative to incentives for public transportation. If you, for example, think ahead and say, we know that it is more cost effective to run on gas for buses or electricity or whatever, and the government provides an incentive for turning public transportation systems to gas and for a period subsidizes the gas that's running those tanks, then we run away from subsidizing middle-class people like myself who drive SUVs, because they're the ones consuming this petrol. And we can then get public transportation running more effectively, but it should be for a season. By then, we get enough people consuming gas to public transport. Then gas can become what runs every motor car. In fact, indeed, the best technology is suggesting that cars should be running on water. But we are far from that in terms of technology. But these are the kind of places we can apply incentives rather than a broad, need to subsidize petrol, people need petrol. And you are subsidizing the man who has already extracted so much rent from the system and has 4 SUVs in his house, he's driving around without thinking about it. The average South African who has a car calculates how much fuel he spends to go to work every week, and his budget is clear. In Nigeria, we don't think about it. I can tell you honestly, I don't think about it, but I should. How much does that gas guzzler cost the system, cost the economy? These are the kinds of issues that we need to pay attention to, not using them as an excuse to punish the poor, which is what we really do in the name of subsidy. And I gave the Telecom example of 96. We punished the people, and there were only 280,000 working telephone lines in the whole country, and we're subsidizing the poor. How many poor people were in that list? Back in those days, I had 2 or 3 telephone lines. So imagine how many Nigerians actually really had telephones and were ostensibly subsidizing those Nigerians, which was a fallacy. And it is getting away from those kinds of fallacies that we must really get into if we're going to make systems work for everybody rather than a select elite.
You know, Prof, when you say that you find it hard calculating the amount of fuel your vehicle guzzles, I mean, the question that comes to my mind is: are you even able to predict all the places you're going to go in a week? Can you predict the traffic that you're going to have to encounter and all of that? It's quite a tough one. But you know, to this same issue, I mean, of the poor, the mostly underprivileged that we have in the country, and the fact that the unemployment figures are there, getting worse by the day, inflation figures, poverty figures are there. There is no doubt that this policy of government, which has already even begun to affect things, is already taking its toll. How effective or how much do you think this policy will affect us as a nation, affect the people that you're talking about in your last comment, before things get better, if they will? Because many people, of course, will tell you, I mean, you are aware, most of the time, it's one thing for the policies to predict that this is the way things are going to go. It's another thing altogether that usually comes out most of the time.
See, part of an approach that I've taken to policy for many years is that for every major policy arena, you need to have a champion, a person who is obsessed and passionate about the policy working and the people's interests being protected, or seeing the people's interests from a broader, longer-term view. And that champion can effectively monitor the adjustments that implementation must take. It's when we are just bureaucratic and treat these things from some prescription, from whether it's IMF or wherever, that we tend to get into these perpetual downward spirals. If we take the current policy areas and we say, look, we want to protect these people, we won't do anything, let's just keep this subsidy, we'll get into the same telecoms example. And we're stuck in this protecting them, and they get worse and worse and worse. But if we recognize that we must allow markets to work for us, and then provide incentives for the markets to properly open up, for the weakest to be truly taken through a bridge period in clever ways, not ways that provide opportunity for rent for some people. Because those things we do to protect the poor, many times it's the powerful who then corner the benefits that are supposed to flow from them, and the poor never really feel anything. So that kind of champion, accountable to the people, you call that champion 2 a.m. I mean, look, a friend of mine tells me a story. I was in Kigali and we're talking. He says, Paul Kagame wakes up in the night and looks out, and there's a part of Kigali that looks dark. And he calls the mayor and says, Mayor, it seems to me that you are sleeping. Mayor says, it's 3 a.m. He says, there is no light in a part of Kigali. Why the hell are you sleeping? And the mayor, that's the end of his night. He has to go and make sure there's light in that part of Kigali. So until we can have serious governing that functions like that, then, you know, we're going to be in this vicious cycle. We've got to have the incentives, we've got to have the policies, but we've got to have passionate champions who want to serve the people, taking care of those things.
And who do you suggest this champion should be, Prof?
We'll find the people in the system, in every particular policy arena. We'll find somebody whose track record says, can deliver, and the people hold them accountable. Look, I am one of those that suggest that we have town hall meetings between people who implement policy and the people who are the, sometimes called the victims of the policy, on a regular basis. Every month, 100, 200 of us jam into some school auditorium. And Mr. Policy Champion, why did this happen 2 weeks ago? Why did this? And he deals with it. Look, many years ago when we founded a group called the Concerned Professionals, all the powerful local government people thought they were above the law, everybody feared. And so around the Idahosa local government in Lagos at that time, we thought, let's get this guy, who was some military guy, I don't remember, retired or so. Look, we have a town hall meeting on how this. To the shock of people, the guy was shaking like a leaf that he was being questioned. And he was promising to do this, promising to do that. But the system has a disincentive for trying to hold public officials accountable. And that is why we're in the mess that we are. We found that local government, I'm talking about 30 years ago or whatever, this local government guy was shaking like a leaf that we called him to account in public at NIA in Victoria Island, questioning what happened in Victoria Island, what happened in Apapa and all of that stuff. People should do that to make sure that government works for the people. Right here, what happens is that the people are the ones that fear government rather than government fearing the people. When government does not fear the people, it's not a democracy. Government must fear the people and be accountable to them all the time.
Just one more thing that I'd like to ask you. This policy came from the CBN. And as you said earlier, it's not the first time. So now, no single policy or agency of government can do one thing alone without a network of activities from other ministries, departments, and agencies. Now, which other ministries, departments, or agencies in the system, just as you said, should also fall in line with this policy in order for it to achieve the desired effect within the shortest possible time?
You deal with a very fundamental question around economic growth in our country. Part of the reason CBN is overreaching itself instead of focusing on inflation and basic regulatory issues is because we've not had fiscal policy in this country for forever. The central bank finds itself trying to deal with monetary policy, fiscal policy, everything, and doesn't sometimes know what it is doing in the middle of all of these things. So we need the fiscal policy authorities to kick in some more with clear-minded direction of where it should be going. And there should be some separation. Unity of purpose, but separation in these matters. But as it is now, the central bank has become manager of the economy, and that's not the way it should be. So we think that if those agencies that deal with fiscal policy issues are more active, we could have a greater balance and have more effectiveness around policy outcome.
You head the Trade Promotion Board of LCCI as well. This will definitely have a direct impact. This policy will definitely have a direct impact on their activities. And the next thing, of course, as is already active, is the increase in prices of goods and services to people. How do we get ahead of this? Is there any getting ahead of it?
Well, there will be a short-term impact, definitely. The markets are already reacting, 525 to the dollar and so on. Again, if we look at history and we are ready to be consistent, we said before when Telecom started, it was 36 naira for a SIM card. And everybody said 36,000, who can afford it? But over time, the initial reaction in the market now, just yesterday we had some initial consultation at the Chamber of Commerce. Our financial services group is looking at it. We are coming out with a position on this matter. But essentially, there will be an initial reaction. The prices will spike a bit because all the vested interests will want to shake the market and try to force government or CBN to think that, oh, we can't sustain this, let's go back. But once that initial reaction is over, the exchange rate will begin to find itself, provided the central bank retains the policy and enables the banks. Because it has been said, as Professor Utomi has emphasized, it's more of a supply situation than a demand situation. If there is regular supply of dollars in the banks have about 12,000 branches in this country, from the top 5 banks that have about 500 branches per bank to all the other 17 banks that have an average of 200 branches per bank. There are about 12,000 branches of banks in this country.
But it's the same banks that Mr. Dr. Badaya Melafia, a former CBN deputy governor, said that can't be trusted.
Yes, because that's the issue of discipline and enforcement. In any system, if you don't enforce a system, the system collapses. So if you provide the currency in all these 12,000 branches, or even half of them, and the CBN enforces the rule that there should be a counter where you can walk in if you have genuine need for foreign currency to travel, to pay school fees, to pay your medical bills, to pay your insurance. You submit the paper, you get it. What happened with Telecom? It was enforced. There was discipline. Talking about champions, the head of NCC at that time, Mr. Ndukwe, ensured that the system worked. And so the first 1 or 2 years, there will be hardship. In the case of this foreign currency, maybe the next few months, there will be. But once we begin, you and I know that we can walk into a bank. I want to travel. I need $4,000. I can get it. And I don't need to go to the Malams. Once it works, you will see the price of the dollar moderating. Because the vast majority of the people responsible for the increase in price of the dollar are pure speculators.
Well, you know, Mr. Idahosa, the only thing I can say is let's just wait and see. Because, I mean, there's so much, you know, distrust in the system now that people are just wondering, okay, who knows what's going to happen tomorrow, just as you said, if we are consistent. But for now, we have to thank you very much. Gabriel Idahosa is managing partner, UHY Margie. It's a business advisory firm. He's also vice president and chairman of Trade Promotion Board of LCCI. We've also had with us Professor Pat Utomi, who is a professor of political economy, and he is a management expert. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and thoughts this morning.